welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, where religion, culture, and politics intersect in real time. I'm one of your hosts for this episode, Jamar Tisby, joined as always by Diana Butler Bass.
I feel like it isn't as always. I've missed 2 weeks. I'm really glad to see both of you again.
You've always got a place here, Diana, and Kristin Du Mez.
Hey, it's good to see you both.
And in absentia is Robbie Jones, busily working away on his manuscript so he can get his next book in. All of y'all have your books out. We're going to talk about that, or have your books out or coming out. And we're going to talk about, Diana, your book later in this episode. Of course, we're scholars, we're historians, and a sociologist. We explore how religion shapes America's past and present. And the kicker is we're responding in real time to the events of the day. There's no prep, no scripts, just raw, unfiltered conversation. That's why we call it the Convocation Unscripted. And this episode is officially in session. Never a dull moment with this White House. Unfortunately, the excitement is almost always negative. And so it really got to me, this latest thing with the president. I'm reading from a journalist's account here. It said U.S. President Donald Trump has said he does not want Somali immigrants in the U.S. And he told reporters they should, quote, go back to where they came from and their country is no good for a reason. He went on to say, I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, and that the U.S. would go the wrong way if we keep taking garbage into our country. And those comments come as immigration authorities are reported to be planning an enforcement operation in Minnesota's the largest, is from what I understand, Somali community. Um, this was, of course, Trump has often said racist things, but this one seems so blatant. So there's no dog whistles anymore. You know, a dog whistle is supposed to signal to some and be unintelligible to others. There's no way any any person of any reasonable assessment of his statements could spin this as anything other than a racist tirade. And but to me there was something like a little bit different. Like this sounded like the Thanksgiving table with the cranky uncle who's just there spouting off at the mouth and you're just like ignore him, put him off in the corner, turn on the football game and hopefully he'll take a nap and leave us all alone.
Yeah,
I'm
nap.
getting that vibe. Right. He did take a nap. He did, while Marco Rubio was talking. But yeah, what did y'all, add this to the heap of racist statements, but did it sound any different? Or maybe the timing was that important?
Oh, I think that it's a signal about how panicked the White House is getting.
Hmm.
And I don't know about you all, but when I've been traveling in the last few weeks, one of the things I noticed was right around the time of the No Kings March in mid-October, and then the White House tear down. All of the sudden, the conversations out in airports and with strangers on the road and taxi cab drivers, they s- they all started to change.
Hmm.
I would say up until kind of mid to late September, people were sort of afraid to talk about Trump in public. People were holding back. There was lots of quiet in airport lounges where people were just kind of sitting in corners by themselves and didn't want to talk to strangers. And then all of a sudden, it started shifting, and I started hearing more absolute sort of public groaning, moaning, and like, what is this? What is this guy doing? Kind of stuff. And so there's clearly, I think, a vibe shift that's happening from the ground up, and we're beginning to see it in specific ways. We saw it in the special elections this fall, where we're seeing big gains for Democrats. Even when they don't win, they're gaining a lot of points in very heavily red areas. And then of course the elections of the two governors, both of which were absolute blowouts, and nobody predicted that. Um, so that's really changed things around. The on the ground action to protest Trump, and protest, especially the immigration stuff. That's been gaining a lot of steam. Chicago, I think, really encouraged people to stand up, and they're still standing up in Chicago. And some of the different uh, actions at Broadview, I think, drew a lot of national attention and made a lot of people braver. And now we're having this Home Depot boycott that is very creative and interesting, where people are, in one case in California, uh, hundreds of people went into a Home Depot and bought 17-cent. I can't even
Oh,
believe that
that.
something costs 17 cents in America. 17-cent ice scrapers, and then they all got in a line and return them all at the exact same time,
Mm.
effectively shutting down the Home Depot and making the staff that was there all just pay attention to this long line of returns. And then Rachel Maddow had a great thing on Monday where there's a resistance gospel choir that's showing up in Home Depot parking lots, and they've been serenading people with Christmas carols with changed words. And she had a clip of the group singing a great rendition of Feliz Navidad. Um, leave our friends alone kind of thing. It was great. And it's, so all of that is multiplying. And the it's very clear that they know that they are losing power and that he has become a lame duck really fast. And so now the question is, the emperor has no clothes. People are saying it, and what do they do? And I think that what you're talking about, Jamar, is that when people panic, they revert to what they know.
Mm.
And so Trump is going back to his sort of worst hits, including uh, really the vile stuff. I mean, please excuse my language, but you remember that it was the shithole countries
Mm.
from the first Trump presidency. When I heard him on that Somali uh, tirade, I thought of that comment because it was a kind of a magnification of something he said 8 years ago. And so I think that he's just lost his footing. He's isolated. There was a very interesting article in The Atlantic this week by Jonathan Lemire called The Bubble Wrap President. And it was talking about how cut off he is right now from the MAGA base. And I don't know if you two noticed, he has not done any rallies.
Mm-hmm.
None. Not a single one this fall. And he's taking very little in terms of questions outside of the press bubble, that his own people pick who's going to be in the press gaggle now. And so there's no outside voices. So he's clearly hiding from the Epstein stuff. He doesn't want to talk about anything that he thinks, you know, would undermine his image of himself being a successful president. And immigration is for him his big success.
So, Kristen, add on to that. Do you think this is
Yeah, there's
something?
more.
Yeah,
But
that
wait,
the wheels
there's
are
more.
coming off. Yeah, right.
There is, right? I mean, yes, that's a start. That's doesn't even begin to, I think, describe the what he's up against right now, right? Because first of all, there's also, when you talk about kind of running into people in airports, and these are on the ground conversations, which is different from the kind of online chatter, which is increasingly controlled by the algorithms, right? So just keep that in mind, that what you see online really cannot be trusted. You've got AI, you've got Zuckerberg and Musk pulling the strings, and I have noticed really clear changes over the past couple of years, really even just since this summer, on what is delivered into my feed in those spaces. But the on the ground, face-to-face conversations, right? That's where you're actually picking up where the average American is at. And, add to the things that you were saying, Diana. Let's talk affordability. Like really, this is not just the latest gotcha. I cannot tell you how many times in the last couple of months I have remarked to my husband, I cannot believe how expensive this or that or that. Like
Right.
groceries. Oh my goodness, I've had to sit down my 19-year-old son and say, cut back on these, protein drinks and all of the things. Like the prices are just skyrocketing. And we have the healthcare, right? The
Mhm.
ACA,
Yep.
without the savings from the government, the rates are going up 100, 200, 300% in some cases, right? Hundreds of dollars. People cannot afford it, right? It's so clear. So this is the time where it's really hitting people's pocketbooks. And if you remember, this was, it's the economy, stupid, right? This was one of the real things that kept pulling Biden and then Harris down, inflation, affordability, and like, all the other stuff is window dressing. What really matters is people's pocketbooks. Well, that's not panning out for the Republicans in their, whereas usually the president doesn't have a whole lot of control over the economy. In this case, he does, right? We have the tariffs. You see even the attacks on the ICE attacks on immigration, right? These all have economic impacts.
Right.
And so people are seeing that. People are seeing that their own lives, even if they aren't paying attention to what's happening to their neighbors, even if they don't even care about what he is saying about Somalis, or if they're just completely in their own bubble, it's breaking into their bubbles too. So there's that. You mentioned in passing the Epstein, right? That has not gone away. And that is really critical because, right, he ran on that it was the Democrats and they were the child traffickers and they were all the evil, and then the whole QAnon grew up around that. Well, that's a big chunk of his base, and now they're turning to him. And then we have the strikes on the alleged drug trafficking boats,
Mhm.
right? And that's another thing where we still do have loss. And there's a lot of heat right now on that front. So you're kind of getting it from all sides. What did I miss, Jamar?
There's, like you said, there is so much. So I just want to pull on a thread that you brought up here about the prices increasing. Fundamentally, if we zoom out, what we're talking about is a centimillionaire, billionaire president and his coterie of people who are stealing from the coffers of the people of the United States. Fundamentally, what this regime is showing is they don't care about everyday people. They certainly don't care about governing or service or any of that. What they do care about is enriching themselves. So one of the things is we know that Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, went with Trump's son in law, Jared Kushner, to the Kremlin to talk to President Vladimir Putin about Ukraine and all the things. But it's also not inconsequential that Kushner is getting money from deals with Russia, millions upon millions of dollars. And the Constitution has rules against that kind of a thing. That you can't be making deals with foreign governments and businesses while also conducting like official US government business. And that has completely gone by the wayside. So, to Trump's followers, what they're going to have to realize real quickly is that not only does he not care about them, what he does care about is stealing from them, getting rich off the presidency, which I think goes back to his even the reason why he ran in the first place was get his name out there, get hotel deals internationally, all of that stuff. It's always been about the money to some degree. So as we talk about authoritarianism, as we talk about fascism, we also need to be talking about kleptocracy,
Yes.
about oligarchy, all of those kinds of things. So that's it. But all of this, it's not just one thing, it's a cascade thing, right? So the
Right.
other part is,
What the
go
oh,
ahead.
I was just gonna say, if I can underscore something you just said, is that one of the things that made me start noticing that people were getting upset was how many people, when the White House was torn down,
Mm,
how many people mentioned that to me. And, at first people were just saying, oh, it's just a building, no big deal. Why are people getting so upset about this? But see, it's an actual symbol of exactly what you're talking about, is that you look at that building and we own it. Every school kid in the United States of America knows that that's the people's house, and that it's basically lent to the president for 4 years or 8 years, but we own it. It's ours. And he just went and he raked it down.
mhm,
And when he did that, it was like he was stealing from us. That's stealing not just money, but it's stealing an image. It's stealing a treasured icon. And in some ways, that moment, I think, was the moment that the light switch began to, really click for a lot of people. Because we can talk about those big words about oligarchy and all those things, but that's a physical representation of the very thing that, like, every person in the United States has a picture of the White House in their mind. And it does not exist like that anymore because
mm.
Trump took a bulldozer to it. And and that's what he's doing. And I think that people know that now.
It's
Honestly, I've been thinking that what we need to be seeing is, uh, you know, for political opponents of this regime. I was going to say Democrats, but no, like anybody,
anybody.
right, who wants to put an end to this corruption, right? They ought to be blanketing the airwaves, right?
Yeah.
In red states, go into those spaces and, sorry to say, the moral issues, the cruelty, all of that stuff doesn't really cut through. But right now, between the grift, just just tell us. Tell us how many hundreds of millions he's handing over to his billionaire cronies. Tell us where that money is going. Tell us what Jared is up to. I mean, if I think about the Hunter Biden episodes,
Hmm.
right? It's just like
Hmm.
all projection, right? Hunter had his problems, sure. Like, dwarfs in comparison to this blatant, just absolute grift that we see at the highest levels. Jared Kushner, and who's he chatting with? Putin. What the heck? Like, this has to be out there, and
Hmm.
we need to see the Mar-a-Lago, Great Gatsby, just decadence,
Yep.
and we need to see the prices and also employment numbers, right?
Yeah.
Horrible employment numbers. These things are just like, we have the numbers, but we are all feeling it. We're feeling it
Hmm.
when we walk into the store. We're feeling it when we're trying to pay our bills. And I just think that has to be the message, that could get through.
I'm glad you said that because part of me is thinking like, does any of this matter? Like, it's his statements about Somalis aren't going to matter. The brutal. I mean, I see videos, multiple videos every day of ICE and Customs and Border Patrol literally brutalizing people. There's family separation here again. There's a child missing who just got lost. Like atrocious things don't seem to be breaking through. What does is the price of eggs,
Yeah.
gas,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And it really is confounding. Like, we see this. Why aren't more people messaging this? I mean, what is going on here? This is really frustrating because the people who have the responsibility and the positions and are elected to do this seem to be missing it. What do y'all do with that? Like you're chin deep in this every day in some way, shape, or form, and I think you can see pretty clearly. I appreciate your insights. Why isn't this breaking through to the sort of political power structure, if you will?
Well, they're kind of bubble wrapped too. I mean, if we can be pretty honest about it, I mean, I live here.
Mhm.
It's a people talk about DC being a bubble. It's a bubble, and then there are people who are bubble wrapped in the bubble. And so I really think that a lot of people, it's sort of the higher up you are in the structure. I hate hierarchy, but there I am using the language of hierarchy. The higher up you are in this structure, the more removed you are. How often does a United States senator just get to kind of hang with people in an airport lounge? I used to see John McCain do that, interestingly enough,
Hmm.
in both in the Phoenix Lounge and also in Dulles, and occasionally run into somebody else, but not very often. Now you do see representatives on occasion in, again, airports or in the train station, but they're running away from you. They don't,
Mm.
they don't want to
Mm.
talk to
Mm.
anybody. They're hiding, and most of them are behind, these walls of bodyguards now. And I think, see, that's another problem, is that the fear that they all have about violence being done to them,
Mm.
the ginning up of violence, has further isolated them from these kinds of grassroots discontents. And, most people who are in those positions are pretty comfortable. And it takes a lot for the crisis of affordability to float up
Yeah.
that high, until they really truly notice it. And they might be worried that they too are part of the elite. And if they start messaging on Mar-a-Lago, will their opponents come at them, about similar kinds of things?
Hmm.
Oh my goodness. I just have so little sympathy right now for this kind of, you were very empathetic there, very perceptive and exploring the possible motivations there. Do not possess such grace right now. Honestly, no, no. Like, you have a job to do, and if you can't do it, get out and let somebody else do it. I do not understand what the Democrats' hang up is. I mean, really, really, even if we just like kind of step out of this hellscape that we're living through and just put back into like normal politics, y- you've got a lot to work with here. Did you want to win next time around? Okay, let's work on some messaging then. Like, if we could just even return to like regular politics, but this is not regular politics at
Right.
all, right? So that's the problem. I don't understand why they can't at minimum do kind of basic messaging, basic politics in this absolutely critical moment when, because here's the frustrating thing. The American people are stepping up, right?
Hmm.
That's right.
Ordinary people in Chicago, in New Orleans, and across this country are saying, put me in, right? They're showing up at Home Depot. I've seen footage of that. Everybody's smiling and friendly, and they're just waiting with their little ice scraper to return it, hours out of their day, showing up in like choirs. They're doing silly things. They're wearing, the dinosaur suits and all, like, we're trying,
We
right?
are trying.
Where is the leadership? The very people who were elected to do this, this is their one job. And frankly, they should have some self-interest, right? Don't you want to actually, if you're the opposing party, you want to actually, uh, play this to your advantage? Like, let's just use whatever self-interest you can find and help us because we can do the popular agitation up to a point, but there has to ultimately be a political solution. uh
That's why I'm still upset about those Democrats in the Senate caving um, during the shutdown. Like, what did we gain? And to your point, everyday people were stepping up. And
Yeah.
that to me was the bitterest part of it.
Yeah.
So many people who have day jobs, who have families, who have their own health concerns, they got to get cars fixed, they got to shovel snow. They were going above and beyond to
Right.
try to make progress. And then this handful of, yes, elite people decided, okay, we're done, and didn't get anything to show for it, I would say, right? Um, but just as a cool aside, talk about running into people into airports. I actually ran into Senator Raphael Warnock in the airport in Atlanta,
Oh no,
and
there's a guy with a different CV.
a little bit different pastor, of the MLK's church. Um, it's sharply dressed, beautifully tailored suit, just looking so slick and polished. And what I couldn't believe is I didn't see an entourage around him. I was like, Are you serious?" So I literally walked right up. He kind of gave me the side eyes, like, "Okay, are you angry and want to say something or what?" And I was just like, "Hey man, I just want to say I appreciate your voice. I appreciate your presence and what you do." I got to shake his hand, but then I'm like, did it ever even happen? Because I didn't get a picture. I didn't broadcast it on social media. So it feels kind of like a dream. And I kind of have to wonder, but it really did happen. And it wasn't even in like the lounge or anything. He was just out by the gate. I'm like, wow, well, okay. So that was cool. Um, but in addition, there like the hit the it just and another one. I want to mention the Nashville special election. So, reading from a journalistic report, it says Republican Matt Van Epps defeated Democrat Afton Bain in a closely watched Tennessee special congressional election, staving off a major upset in a race that attracted President Donald Trump's help to avoid a GOP disaster in an overwhelmingly Republican district. And just to put some numbers behind it, Van Epps, who was a combat vet, former commissioner of the Tennessee Department of General Services, topped Bain, who was a progressive Democratic state rep, by single digits. I think
She's
it ended
actually
up.
DSA too.
What
She's
is that? Oh,
she's
yes, Democratic Socialist.
yeah.
So in Tennessee, and she topped the Republican topped her in the election in by I think it ended up about 9 points, but that was a district that Trump had won by 22 points in last year's presidential election. And so this is a special election. It's not completely representative of what we could expect in midterms or some other regular election, but I mean, I know a bunch of people in Tennessee who are going again, like just regular people. They are going all out to flip these districts and to say, "Hey, to the National Democratic Party or whomever, don't give up on the South. Don't give up on these red states. There is a chance to change things, and it doesn't take every district being flipped, just a few of them. It can turn the tide in Congress in a pretty dramatic way." So I thought that was it was really part of the dissatisfaction and the distance now between Trump and his MAGA base that even in a special election in Tennessee, it seemed like the district was in play.
I wonder if we're not talking about the populist influence here, um, or impulse here, because uh, the Tennessee election, she was out there. I mean, she was doing the work. She was with people. She was on the ground. She herself was an on the ground activist, and so she and Mondani,
Mom and Donnie, yeah.
yeah, I always get the M and the N mixed up. But so he was the same thing, going out to street corners and doing the work and really speaking to people. And it was the sort of hey man election. And what you just described about Raphael Warnock, there are a few people in the government who are not afraid of being close to regular folks. Um, and so we see these politicians, both on left and right, who do have, and I think Marjorie Taylor Greene for good. pity's sake, has mostly been a populist in the MAGA frame. And yet, that's really where she is. Trump is now afraid of populism because of
Mm,
all the things that we're talking about, especially the stuff about Jared Kushner and the money, 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 as you're talking about, Jamar, that's just coming in. And so he doesn't want to be out there with people anymore because he's got the cash. And a lot of the Democrats, they're afraid of populism. As I said, it's like it's going to come up and bite them in the bottom too if you feed that populist instinct too much. But the populist instinct, the people, we're the only ones who are out there trying to defeat authoritarianism. And so they're going to have to figure out how to deal.
hmm.
I mean,
Idea.
but isn't that a little like the civil rights movement, Jamar? Because it was the people who were on the streets who were agitating, and the politicians were dreadfully slow.
Dreadfully. Yeah, they had to be dragged into doing the right thing. And it was only through that sort of grassroots bottom up pressure that it really came. And you can even look at the community level where there are local political leaders or even church leaders. They're not eager to run out by and large and be at the forefront of a resistance movement. That's dangerous to them. It's dangerous to their position, to their bottom line, to the respect that they feel they deserve. That is not something generally people who sort of arrive in a leadership position are eager to do. And so it always has to come from the people. There was this book I read in grad school. I don't know if you heard of it, Kristen, or either of you, Diana. It's called Forced Founders. I'm blanking on the author right now, but the premise was really interesting in that um, the author was arguing that in the revolutionary era, leaders from military leaders to political leaders, it was the grassroots who really forced their hand to have to change conditions for the better. And so it was Native Americans, it was enslaved Black people, it was women who were disenfranchised in so many ways, that the pressure from these groups actually instigated action on the part of leadership rather than this top down history that we're often taught about these great men, and it's almost always men in the books, right? Who just out of a sense of nobility and morality, they do the right thing. That's not typically how it goes in history. And so I would say to the people who are feeling the pressure, that is pretty in line with history. And you're in good company. And that pressure does actually make a difference. If you want to see leaders move, it's best not to wait on them to try to get the right ideas. It's best to put pressure on them to say, hey, this is what we want.
And let me give a quick shout out, though, that we did have some congressional Democrats stand up. All right, a couple of weeks ago, the group with national security backgrounds, right, who
Mhm.
issued this statement, to the military, a reminder of, the constitutional principle that they are not to follow illegal orders, right? And that
Mhm.
blew up, and Trump accused them of sedition, which he said was punishable by death. Right. So again, that's not like top of our list here, right? But that happened, it was, what, a whole week ago. And
Yeah,
so,
right.
so much has happened since. But what's interesting too is, right, then you get, Carolyn Levitt and so on, saying, well, Trump doesn't give illegal orders. So therefore, what
Your
they're
leader is
doing is
always right.
illegal
Yes.
and it is sedition and all these things. Well, and then of course we have the shooting
Hmm.
of the
National Guard
Venezuelan
troops.
boat,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And so,
Okay.
right, you want to talk a legal order. So all of a sudden, that's kind of quieted down because now the focus is here. But before we maybe move on to that, I did just want to say that what those Democrats did, right, simply their job, right, speaking out of their expertise, right, military and national security expertise, and simply all they said was obey the Constitution, do your jobs. And that got them, I mean, again, Like, how is that not more of a thing? It was for like a day.
Yeah.
I heard there was an interview with Slotkin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Melissa.
on this, and she's gotten apparently thousands of death threats,
Yes.
including real things where the police had to be called out to her house to
Yeah.
check for
Yeah. She
bombs.
was swatted. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think to myself, see, that's part of that fear that was making
Yeah.
me feel very generous towards
Yeah.
uh, the Senate, where if you do tie everything to a threat of personal violence against you, I mean, you still may be able to stand up. Lots of people are brave, even when threats of violence are put against them as individuals. But then you start bringing in their families or their
Yeah.
homes. And I keep thinking about that representative in Indiana, where they've been going through the gerrymandering thing to try to get more seats for the
Mhm.
Republicans, get rid of the one Democrat who has a I guess there are two actually, two districts where Democrats represent Indiana in Congress, and they want to get rid of both of those. And the one guy who is the president, I think, of the Senate, I can't, I'm not getting it quite right, but I know what he said. He said, "This is wrong, and I don't want to see it go through, but I also don't want to see my house get firebombed." And so that was making me think that's like real Klan stuff
Yeah.
from the 1920s in Indiana.
Hmm.
Their entire we all know them. We read those books. Their entire books written about the pressure that right-wing groups put on leaders in Indiana and how hard it was for politicians to make a move even when they wanted to do the right things. And so what you bring up, Kristen, is a perfect example of that kind of mafioso clannish thing that's being directed at some of these people right now, and this is deeply problematic. And I bring up the civil rights movement because of course that was also present then, as well, and it takes a lot to get people over that hump.
Well, I want to bring up one more aspect that's related because now we're essentially talking about violence, and we
Right.
mentioned Pete Hegseth. So this is the latest with him. There's a Democratic representative, Shri Tanadar, who announced that he'd be filing articles of impeachment against the Secretary of Defense. I'm still calling it the Defense, not Secretary of War, Pete
Thank you.
Hegseth. um, Representative said this secretary has to go. He's incompetent. He's violated. He's committed war crimes. He must go. And in addition to that, bringing up again the Signal Gate, where Hegseth was in the group chat discussing a discussing a pending strike on the Houthis in a different country, and so he's bringing up that as a national security risk and incompetence in general in the job, which we all knew. This is a Fox News host now in charge of $1 billion budget and a 2 million person military force. I am still shocked and appalled that his confirmation went through. Like, that shouldn't have even come to the floor. They shouldn't have even had to question him because it was such a ridiculous suggestion. But now, not only is he incompetent, people are dying because of his orders.
People are being murdered.
Being murdered.
So
So,
he's not just incompetent, right? He is that, right? He does not have anywhere close to the skill set, nor do I, right? I couldn't step into any kind of a position like that, right? I mean, honestly, right? That's the point. Like there are few positions in this country that require more competence than that one, right? Just to be very clear, right? So he doesn't even come remotely close to having the qualifications to do that work. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is his entire ideology, his core commitment. So I was just talking with a reporter yesterday who asked, How does his Christian faith and the particular type of Christian faith, that he goes to a CREC church, Doug Wilson, and embraces Christian nationalism. How does that play into what we're seeing right now and how he is, going about this job? And I said there is a direct connection here, right? There is the idea that, he represents God. He represents all that is right and true. Therefore, anything he does is right and true. There is no need for any rules of engagement, none whatsoever. When you embrace that kind of a framework, uh, and this is pervasive in Christian nationalist spaces, right? The Constitution does not exist, not as we know it, right? The Constitution is always interpreted in a way that aligns with what you were going to do anyway. And you say that's because it's God's will, right? And evildoers, you get to decide who is good and who is evil. You are always good, you are always righteous. The evildoers out there have to be destroyed. There is no due process. There is no rule of law. There's no international law, no rules of engagement, none of that. They're a bad guy. I can do whatever I want to them. Like, it is direct. This is who he is. This is exactly who he said he was. He's written books telling us that this is what he would do and what the military should do. There is no mystery here. And yes, people should have read those books and taken them to heart before they voted to confirm him.
Yeah, I was just doing a workshop with Sharon McMahon on white Christian nationalism, and we had an image of Pete Hegseth and his tattoos. And we've talked about this before, but of course, there's that one of him bare chested and covering an entire half of his chest is the what's known as the Crusader cross, right? It's not just a regular cross that you might see like Carolyn Levitt wears every day as she spews lies. Um, and on his arm, there's the tattoo that says Deus Volt,
Yeah.
which is right next to an American flag, which is right above two crossed rifles and more of these. And I'm just like, again, we talked about this. Like, this has to come up in the confirmation hearings, not as a religious test, but like we do with Supreme Court justices saying, well, how do your religious beliefs factor into judgments you might make? We should have asked the same thing to Hegseth. And to your point, Kristen, what those tattoos, what those symbols are saying, Deus Vult is Latin for God wills it,
Right.
and the Crusader cross, he believes he's in a holy crusade.
Yeah.
Right.
He believes he's on a holy mission, divinely ordained by God, to use the power of the sword, in this case, the US military, to enact this white Christian nationalist vision, not only domestically, but globally. And
Yeah.
this is why he apparently has no qualms about doing what they call a quote unquote double tap, where they strike, there are survivors, go back and kill them all. Is the language there, because in a holy war, in a holy crusade, there's no holds barred. It's all in service to a divine mission. And so, by any means necessary, whatever carnage necessary, and that is very relevant to
Yeah.
how he does his job. And by the way, it's only being reinforced every Sunday that he goes to church. And it's a horrible vector of this kind of violence. But those are the kinds of things where if we don't take one of the things I've said, politics is downstream of religion. We saw this language, this ethos in the Doug Wilsons of the world, who now have acolytes and devotees like Pete Hegseth,
Mhm.
and it all matters. But when we don't pay attention to the religious signals, whether because of fear or ignorance or whatever, then you end up here.
One of the things that really has just come back to me so strongly in the wake of all this is I used to teach history of Christianity, just the basic, year zero to now course. It was kind of the bread and butter course that I usually would do when I was a professor. And when we got to the Crusades, I would give the students a document to read. And the document was a letter that was written home by a Crusader from, I believe, France to his mother back at home. And you read this document, and what he says is, dear mom, we're having a wonderful time here, and then says, we beat back the infidel. We went to church to celebrate, and he tells her what it was like. We walked into the church, and there was the blood of the Muslims up to our ankles, and we
Mm,
rejoiced, and we took the Holy Communion. And uh, I, I just can't get that letter out of my mind this week because it's the same. It's when you say God wills it. I mean, those were the words that started the Crusades. That those are the words the Pope uttered to stir up the first troops in France. Go out and kill the infidel. Go to the Holy Land. And so that reprise of that, it necessitates excessive gory violence,
mhm,
and that sense of worshiping God with blood. I mean, and we've all written about this in different ways, of course, over the years, but there it is. And Hegseth's doing it. Now, this is the piece that really fascinates me here. And really want you two to both tell me what to get my head screwed on about this one. Ultimately, however, that crusader out there, it probably really did wield that sword that led to that much blood in the streets of Jerusalem as he was walking into the church. Hegseth, in certain ways, I mean, he's incredibly dangerous and he is doing all these things, but it's almost like a performative crusade.
Yeah.
mm.
Because one of the things that he has done in the last week is like, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so, like, why isn't he proud of this? I mean, that's what I keep asking myself. Is he really just fundamentally a freaking coward? Who, I mean, if he was a real manly man, wouldn't he have like the Truman, the buck stops here sign sitting on his desk saying, "Yep, that's me. That's my Department of War. We're gonna get out there and we're gonna kill all those people, and let that poor admiral off because he was just doing exactly what I want him to do. The buck stops here." Isn't that what this kind of manhood and masculinity is supposed to be about? Is it just about painting scary things on your body and then running away when times get rough and when you might wind up being impeached for the job you have forced on somebody else? I mean, isn't he really just a coward, Crusader?
You have such a way with words, Diana. I go back to the fact that he was a Fox News host, and
Yeah.
he's fundamentally a performer. He's an
Showman.
on-screen personality, and he's doing, yes, the performative things that he thinks a Secretary of War should do. But when things get real, well, I wasn't there. I didn't hear about it till after the fact.
He
Somebody
left
else's
the
problem, right?
room.
I left the room. Yeah. Yeah. So it does get to that. I mean, when you elect a president who's a former host of The Apprentice, right? And you get all of these Janine Pirro, right? Folks who are literal television personalities, who are performers, who are acting in a certain way. Of course, when it gets real, as government work does, I think they will shrink. But I mean, Kristen, you're literally writing about this all the time.
Yeah, well, I think part of what's happening here too is they're testing. They're testing.
Mhm.
You're seeing
Oh,
that every day. Seeing how far they can push and what they can get away with. And the answer is they can get away with almost everything. And then when they run into a little bit of an obstacle, as in this case, where people are like, excuse me, we actually have laws against this, including people like in the military and in Congress who are saying, no, and that if we still have those laws and if the courts still operate, right, then all of a sudden the heat gets turned up there. And then, right, the resort is always just blatant lies.
Mm,
Absolutely right. This also is justified as part of the system, right? You're doing God's will. There is no honor as we understand it. There is no integrity. No, it is just doing whatever it takes to get away with it. That is all. So the entire like morality is completely like reshaped within these systems around whatever it is that serves the system. Right. That's how this works. So that's what you see happening, just absolute blatant lies. And the whole kind of flood the zone that we've been living through for the past 13 months means that there are so many fires that we
Hmm.
cannot possibly be putting them all out, right? And again, they're testing to see what they can get away with. They might walk it back a half a step, hope that something else distracts, and then they'll press on another front and they'll come back, right? So,
Right.
I don't know what the strategy is, except at least in some of these cases, right? Yes, bring articles of impeachment. See if the legal system still functions. Just stick to the processes that we have and, use them to their fullest.
So I think fundamentally what we're talking about is we're talking about crusades and all these things. We're talking about a clash of empires. And we happen to be in December when we're recording this, and it's the month of Advent. And Diana, you have this fascinating series. I love the title of it. Will you tell us what it's called and how you see these sort of empires in conflict in this season?
With my friend Trip Fuller, who is a theologian, and he has a Substack and a website and a big community called Homebrewed Christianity. And every year, Trip and I do one, two, or three online classes together. And we love doing the seasonal ones. So he asked me if I'd help him out this Advent. And we're co teaching a 4-week class called Advent Against Empire.
Mm,
And the class opened this last Tuesday, and my job was to look at the birth narrative, the Jesus birth narrative in the Gospel of Matthew. And I've got the theme Advent against Empire in my mind, and I go to look at Matthew chapters 1 and 2, and I will summarize it incredibly briefly. Matthew 1 is a chapter where you get this long genealogy of Joseph, Jesus' stepdad, according to Christian theology. And basically, what that genealogy is, it's not a biological genealogy. It's essentially a genealogy of the righteous of Israel. And so you get this multi-generational picture of all the heroes and kings and prophets of Israel and the foreigners who came into the line of righteousness, mostly who were all women: Tamar, Ruth, Rahab, some very interesting biblical figures. And then it says at the end of this, and this is Joseph's line. So, in other words, this is the family that he is bringing Jesus into, is the whole line of the righteous of Israel. And the line of the righteous of Israel, these people are considered to be the people who are the forerunners of uh, what Jesus will call the kingdom of God, the great age of justice and mercy that is going to dawn on this earth, the age of shalom, the age of peace. And so you have chapter 1 giving this sort of panoramic vision of all these Old Testament heroes, and you can think of all their stories if you know the Old Testament. And then it says there's Joseph, who's the heir of this line, and I love this. Just one quick verse. It says, Mary was engaged to Joseph, and she was found to be pregnant. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. There's the law, is that if your fiance, if your betrothed got pregnant out of wedlock, you could just dismiss them. And so he was planning on doing that. But he has a dream, and an angel appears to him. And so what happens is, in that dream, Joseph hears the voice of God and decides that he's not going to put Mary away, but instead he's going to take her as his bride and adopt this son, and he provides a place of protection and safety for her. It's an amazing story. And then Jesus is born, and he's part of this family, the line of the righteous of Israel. So that's really about the hope for this reign of justice. And then you get to the next chapter, and the very first line in the next chapter is, in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And it tells the story of the wise men. But in the
Mhm.
time of King Herod, everybody hated Herod in ancient Judea, because he was appointed as a puppet king over Jerusalem by none other than Mark Antony at the behest of Julius Caesar, and his appointment to the kingship of Israel was confirmed by the Roman Senate. And
Mm.
so Herod is an agent of imperialism. He's an agent of colonization. He's an agent of empire. And what does he do? Well, you get a wonderful story about wise men bringing presents to Jesus, but he tries to deceive the wise men to get them to tell him where this baby is being born, so he can go and worship the baby, which what he really wants to do is, get rid of him because he's a threat to his throne. The wise men don't fall for it. In effect, they deceive Herod back, and they just don't do what they resist. They rebel against an imperial order to return and tell Herod where Jesus is. And then Herod gets so angry is that he goes and he kills um, all the little Jewish children under the age of 2, echoing the story, of course, that is in the Old Testament about Moses. But, and we don't really know if that episode historically happened. There's no real evidence of it historically. But it's interesting that Herod was so hated that people would believe that he would do that.
Mm.
And so, what we get in the first 2 chapters of the Matthew, in the birth narrative of Jesus, is a story about righteousness and justice and peace. And we get a story about violence and destruction and power and wealth, and what one unworthy ruler will do in order to keep his throne. Advent against empire. The coming of Christ over and against the imperial forces of this world. And you can't help but think about the headlines when you read these things. Um,
So,
that's the beginning of the story. That's where we are in the church year.
and I just want to remind listeners that Diana's latest book, A Beautiful Year, is a wonderful resource, devotional to go through the liturgical year, including Advent. So if you want to do a deeper dive there, you can pick up that book wherever books are sold. I think that's a good benediction for our time together. Thank you, Pastor Diana, and thank you, as always, Kristin.
If I could say one add to the
Yes.
benediction too, because to draw the parallel right to today, what we see is the light of the gospel breaking in, right? We
Mm.
see the mystery, the incarnation, right? That's the beauty of Advent. It's dark, but there's this little light, right? And so if we're feeling this darkness now, right? What is that light breaking in, right? Spiritually, and I wanted to return to kind of where we started, which was the Somali immigrants.
Oh,
And you know, on the one hand, that's tragically probably not going to be the right political messaging strategy, but morally, right?
right.
In terms of our humanity, um, it should be at the center. And what I do know is that many of the communities where Somalis have found a home, their path has been eased by, and they've been welcomed by church communities, including conservative Christian churches, including a lot of people who voted for Trump. Right? And I have been looking and hoping to hear voices from inside those churches. speaking on behalf of their sisters and brothers in Christ, right? Many of these folks are Christians. Not that you have to be Christian to, have your dignity upheld, but these are friends. These are neighbors,
Right.
right? And this is a time in the midst of darkness when the light can shine most clearly, right, for those who are willing to step out. So I think that, in the darkness and in the season of Advent, we can keep looking for the light and looking to be that light, to reflect that light.
And yeah, sometimes it seems like empire is just going to win.
Yeah,
Hmm.
And
often,
yeah,
always.
there's also this other really interesting little moment in that text where in the line of the righteous, when it gets up to Jesus, it says that you should call your son Emmanuel, God with us. And
Mm.
that's how they name Jesus, God with us. And then in that next verse, when we move into the empire narrative, the King Herod narrative, uh, he says to the wise men, "Show me where this King of the Jews has been born." And so Jesus was named the King of the Jews by the empire. And this
Mm.
false idea of what kingship, or this false idea of what, being the political head of a country is supposed to look like. And yet what was really born was what you're talking about, Kristen, God with us. This quiet light born at sort of the edge of the world in a tiny village, just by a man deciding that he's going to do right by the woman he loves and
Mm.
take her in, no matter what the rumor, no matter what the sacrifice that he has to make in order to do the right thing. And that, I think Advent really calls us to that,
Mm.
just like you're saying, to be that kind of presence to refugees and immigrants right now in this country.
And I love that image, the inbreaking of light into darkness. That's fundamentally what the birth of Jesus heralds, and it's what we are to be as followers of Christ, little lights in this darkness. And so I hope by spending some time with us today, you've gotten a glimpse of that light. On behalf of my impromptu co pastors here, thank you for joining us on the Convocation Unscripted. Remember to subscribe to our individual Substacks as well as the convocation.substack.com. We'll see you next time.